Welcome to Franklin Covey's Leading Through Uncertainty, the podcast to help business leaders navigate the pressures of AI and unpredictable markets with bold, creative solutions. I'm your host, Patrick Ledden, and through my research and years of experience, I've studied how disruption can leave organizations in the dust if not handled properly. Over the course of 6 episodes, we'll cover topics such as task prioritization, skill building, resilient cultures, and much more. Because doing what's always been done won't just hold businesses back, it could leave them behind. It's time to act different to emerge different. We're in for a treat today. Today's episode is all about why performance stalls during uncertainty and how to get it moving again. And the treat is a conversation with Scott Thele, best-selling author and national practice leader. Hey, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here. Great to see you, Patrick. I'm excited for our topic today.
It's great to see you too. I'm excited for the topic as well. And folks don't know this, but you and I have gone back some 20 some years working together. And it's just always an honor to chat with you. Especially, I don't think, Scott, there's very many people on planet Earth who've spent more time helping leaders execute, remain agile, deal with difficult times. So I just want to jump right in from the very beginning. From your perspective, what are some key traits of leaders who excel at being really agile in their execution in these high pressure environments and moments?
One of the things I've seen that really helps a lot, leaders who take a breath to get clear before they go fast tend to do a lot better. Sometimes people have such a bias for action that they start frenetically going from thing to thing to thing. But it's that moment of clarity. And as we've done research over the past quarter century on the topic of what makes organizations effective around, executing their strategy, that's one of the big challenges. People are a whole lot less clear than they really think they are. One of our colleagues made a great comment and observation one time. She said, it's not enough for people to understand what you said. It's that they can't misunderstand what you mean. And in times of uncertainty, as you're going through this, I think putting a premium on being very clear about what is expected and what are you trying to accomplish is really, really important.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, Scott, where it feels like sometimes as a leader, we've got it all figured out in our own head. And sometimes we may even articulate it, but there's often a gap between, our mouths and their ears and their ears and their minds and their minds and their hands. I mean, there's kind of a gap that exists sometimes. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's more than fair. And the research is just overwhelming. We ask leaders all over the world, do your people know, what the goals are in the organization? And we've been asking this for 25 years, and the answers really haven't changed in terms of what the actual results are. And it's about 16% of the people inside of an organization have been able to articulate a goal that even resembles the right goal. I mean, we're very generous when we start doing that. So yeah, I would say the gap between what we think people understand and what is actually understood, because people are also very busy. So you're talking to busy people and trying to be clear. And if you don't have a consistent message on that, it will get lost in the day-to-day.
It just seems that when I'm in the pressure moment, and if I'm in a leadership role, especially a formal leadership role with maybe lots of responsibility, kind of that weight on your shoulders, and you're trying to steer an organization through some challenging times, the natural inclination is be like, we got to go faster. We got to go faster. So maybe I even start to talk faster. I set more goals. I go after more things. And what I hear you saying is sometimes you got to slow down and focus a little differently.
Yeah, and all of our research points to focus. In the midst of all of the turbulence, if you try and do too many things, nothing good happens, right? People were already busy before the change happened. Now they've got to navigate that change. It's really important that you limit the number of targets you're trying to go after.
So if I were to say to you, all right, so what you need to do in a time like this where there's a lot of uncertainty, is you need to figure out how to be quick, but maybe not too quick as you adapt. What would you say to me?
Yeah, I love that observation because it feels like a dichotomy. And Stephen Covey used to say this, sometimes slow is fast and fast is slow. A few minutes up front to gain clarity allows you to go fast with much less wasted energy. So I think that we have to go fast. Therefore, we have to put a premium on the starting line. How clear are we as we begin?
I've noticed, Scott, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, that a lot of times, if I had a team of leaders around a table, and this could be my own leadership when I ran my own business, or leaders with client leaders that we're working with, they sometimes think, oh yeah, we all have this shared vision of what we're trying to do. We all have this shared strategy. We have all this, we all have the same truths about what we think is going to unfold in the industry right now, or how all the changes like tariffs and economic uncertainty and all these things are going to play out. But the reality is, like, we all have our own little stories that we tell ourselves, and sometimes we don't take the time to articulate them to each other and actually get on the same page. I know that your work spends a lot of time helping leaders do that. How do you see it when they walk in the room? What's often going on in their heads? And I think people listening can then pause and say, okay, are we experiencing the same thing here?
There's a bit of a rude awakening with an exercise that I like to do. If I've got a group of people who are convinced that, they've done a good job communicating, I'll just have them write down their top 3 goals in order of priority and compare the notes. It's a little discouraging. You group of 7 executives around the table, and you typically have at least 7 different prioritizations of the goals. Sometimes the goals don't even overlap. So I think there's a confirmation bias that we all have. It's like, oh, I know I've said this, so everyone must be clear on it. Or I said it twice or 3 or 7 times. And some of the data that we've collected on this topic is when people are writing down, so I said 16% of the people can actually capture what the goals are. The 84% of the people that got it wrong actually are saying something, not that they made up, but something they heard a leader say. So the noise in the system replaces the last, good idea, the last thing that you said strategically clear with the next 10 things that they heard somebody else say in a different meeting.
So it's a little bit like the people are saying, well, I think this is important. I think that is important. And even if the leader's like, no, that's not the top priority, they're probably realistically also saying, the leader's saying like, I know I said it that one time in that town hall. I know I wrote about it in that email. I know we made coffee cups with that logo on it, but that's not really the big thing. But what I hear you saying is like, it doesn't matter. You're putting it out there and just people are picking it up when they can. It's not like they're lazy or don't want to know. It's just they're busy. And when times are uncertain, that's a lot of noise in the system.
Yeah. So they go back to the last thing they heard. I like the coffee cup example, right? So if I have a coffee cup that says, Project Phoenix. I don't know why, but that was a big name of projects, especially in the 90s, up from the ashes. Everybody was having a rough time. So Project Phoenix is a cup, then that's the last thing that people see. And there is real energy being spent on suboptimal priorities, which exacerbates the problem with trying to achieve your goals, because now you're diffusing the energy and effort that you had across unwanted targets, not just the other busyness that you have in the day to day.
Yeah, I would imagine if I were to do the exercise you mentioned, or if anybody listening were to do that exercise where they had the 7 executives sit down and write their prioritized list, we'll probably have 7 different lists. And then if you extend it to at scale, hundreds or thousands, or how many people, tens of thousands you have in your organization, you can just imagine the lists and the lack of clarity. I always think it's interesting, Scott, one nice thing about talking to somebody like you is, a lot of us can point to the problem sometimes. So you can say, okay, this is what the problem is, a challenge around clarity and stuff. But then there's people like you can not only point to the problem and articulate it really well where we get it, like in a few short words we get it, but also can point to times where you've seen it done well. So could you walk us through perhaps or share with us an example? And I know you have to be guarded or perhaps maybe not around who you can talk about or not talk about, but if you can give us an example, because I have to find, if I hear an example, it's like, okay, I see there's hope. I see that something different can happen. So an example where maybe somebody was, you walked in the room and there were 7 different priority lists, and then sometime down the road, we actually got it much, much clearer and better.
Oh, there's a whole bunch of those. I have the great privilege of spending my time doing that. So I get a lot of those, but one does come to mind, and I won't tell you the company, but I'll tell you the guy's name. His name is Harry. And I met Harry, and he owns a technology company, and he's been running the business himself. I think he's the primary owner, and they've been in business since the mid 80s. And they're at an inflection point. They had a lot of priorities. They brought us in. And while we were wrestling with the priorities, they had growth targets, they had service targets, they had all targets across so many fronts that it was really kind of mind-numbing, to be honest. And as we peeled back the layers, he said, I'm not sure where to point all of our energy. I said, well, what's happening in the marketplace? He goes, well, we're getting pressure to commoditize across each of our sub areas. So we're starting to feel that we need to increase our combination. So you think about packages, bundling, services, all of the things that you would imagine. And we agreed upon saying, all right, how many people do you have today that take full advantage of your services in the way that you'd like? So products, services, and support. So you think about those three general areas. And you said, well, it represents about 8% of our client base. I said, would it be a good strategic bet to move that number? And they actually did. And we coined the term R3. They had the right three things, so and they increased the number of R3, and that was demonstrable in their impact. And the interesting thing was there was a lot of pressure at that time, but in retrospect, we've been working together coming up on 2 years. We just met with him a few weeks ago, and he said, we're in a much better position to deal with all of this uncertainty because we paid the price to get strategically clear and start on that journey. So the best time to change, Stephen Covey used to always say, is 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So they had the good fortune to realize that the direction that their environment was pushing them was not the strategic direction that they wanted to move in. So they had to create an alternate vision of success. Then we did that, and then they've made some fantastic progress. And I hope he gets a chance to hear this, because I'm not that it's my place, but I'm really proud of the work that he's put in and the change that they've made.
It's interesting. One of the classes I taught at Vanderbilt was leading business through times of crisis. And one of the sections we would teach would be guest speaker driven. So we bring in these guest speakers, and some of these people were pretty high visibility folks who dealt with lots of uncertainty, lots of disruption, lots of crises over the course of their career. One guy I remember is a guy named Doug Parker. He was the CEO of American Airlines at the time. So you can imagine Doug Parker comes in. He actually came in with Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Association. So those two come into the room, 30 students, right? Nice, tight little group, and they're talking. And Doug Parker said this thing to me, which I think aligns with what you were just talking about. He said, crisis is never the time to start making introductions. And his point was like, you better know these people before the problem ever even shows up on your radar. And I think we get that, Scott, when you're talking about like, hey, Stephen Covey says things like you should have done it in the past, or the idea of like, I want to plant a tree, you should have done it 20 years ago type of thing. But there's probably people listening right now going, okay, I didn't plant that tree or accidentally ran over with the mower or whatever it might be. And I'm here right now. I can't go back in time. There's no time machine that I'm aware of at this moment. So Scott, I am going to hit pause and do something. What's the right first step?
I love that question. And I'm sorry I couldn't join you. I'm sure I was invited. I must have just missed the invite to come speak at your class at Vanderbilt.
Of course.
But I think the best thing you can do is take a moment to reconnect all the way to who you are as an organization. We talk about, Stephen Covey used the term mission, but however you talk about your purpose, why you exist, and how do you win in the marketplace? You think about, people have to understand why they should show up, both your customers and your employees. And once they know that, they need to know how they can win. As people every day are making thousands of decisions, multiply that by hundreds or thousands of people, and there are so many opportunities for people to be misaligned with your purpose. So I think reconnecting back to, why are we here? Now evaluate, based on the current environment, do we need to change what success looks like for us? For Harry's company, he had to change what success was looking like. They started pointing in a new direction, and then reassess your plan on how you're getting there. So the environment is shifting. What elements of our strategy no longer are either effective or are useful to move towards our new vision if it's changed? And then once you've taken a look at that, I think are we aligned to deliver upon that promise? And then you start looking at, system structure. So I think at the beginning of any kind of reflection, you should get grounded on what's most important and say, are we moving in the best direction based on what we know today towards that ultimate target?
Well, one thing, Scott, is I know that we've had 4,500 or so implementations in the solution area you work in with clients to help people like Harry in the world to gain clarity on things. And I'm just curious, you mentioned the word win. And I'm just curious around this word win. I can see as an executive, for example, oh, I got this target I want to win on, or even a leader at any level, perhaps. I have this goal I'm trying to win on, and it's important, and it's going to show up on my resume and all those type of things. But In general, what has all your work taught you about everybody in the organization and the importance of winning? Because I think sometimes you feel like, oh, I'm the executive. I'm the only one around here who cares about us winning right now, type of thing. I mean, what's the value for everybody when it comes to winning?
I think it's everything. If you want to go back into the research, into the 60s, Frederick Hertzberg was talking about what it meant for people to be engaged at work. And it's very separate. So if you want to, talk about the hygiene theory that he came up with, there's things that make you satisfied at work. And he calls that hygiene, my working conditions, my benefit package, pay, all of those sorts of things. And people will quit you over those and they may come to work for you for over those, but they actually don't correlate with whether or not you're engaged. So am I satisfied with my job? Am I into the work? Those are two different things. And I think that what he said is that there's two things on the list for engagement, and only two. It's progress and purpose. And progress is that winning. Am I playing something where I can in fact win? And the purpose thing is, does it matter? And what's interesting to me in my journey around that, we call it a high stakes winnable game. Same two variables. But the high stakes piece, when I first started doing this maybe 25 years ago, the questions were more around what is the love and peace kind of global, satisfaction of everything in the world kind of goals. Oh, those are what make you engage. And that's really not the case. We started working with organizations like heavy manufacturing, people working on big greasy machine. They got really engaged when they, for the first time in their careers, oftentimes, got really clear about what it was and they could win. So they had their first winnable game in a 35-year career. So I think that the winning piece matters. As human beings, we are really motivated by something that matters. So the purpose piece and making progress. And what really kills that is futility. Give a top performer a task that has no end, which we all do. By the way, we call that the whirlwind, as the day-to-day activity. And the whirlwind doesn't have a finish line or your business shuts down. So, that has to keep going. And if you want to re-engage somebody, maybe a good former performer who seems to be a little worn out, introduce the concept of a high stakes winnable game and watch what happens.
It's funny when you just said that, you said, think about introduce the concept of a high stakes winnable game. I actually was writing down the word stakes as you were talking because I was thinking about the podcast here, the tagline to this is about all the idea of I need to act different to emerge different. And we talked about a couple things that I think you would say, hey, these are some things you need to act different. One is you need to be proactive. If you didn't start 20 years ago, start today. You need to start with some clarity on a few key things, including things like purpose, vision, mission, values, those type of fundamental things of organizations. You also said to recognize and act on the reality that sometimes going slower is going fast, which is counterintuitive sometimes, especially when you're feeling like I just need to do something. And we hear that all the time, like I just need to do something. But then when you talked about stakes, like making it a high stakes winnable game, you used the word whirlwind, and I can just envision like this whirlwind of activity, and every organization has this whirlwind activity, and you need this to kind of keep the lights on, I guess, and keep the business running. But then when I say high stakes, it's like I'm going to cut right through the noise of all that and drive something in so clear, like this thing matters. Am I seeing that right? And if I get it right, and if I am right with that, how do leaders do it? How does that clarity help, or even maybe sometimes scare people because it's all of a sudden like, okay, no joke, we got to deliver this.
Yeah, I think it's, I would say you have it right. The concept of whirlwind, and we use it as shorthand to really talk about all of the work that's going on today. So just maintaining your trajectory. And most organizations I'm talking to, I don't know about you, but nobody's calling up going, I've got 20% of my workforce that just doesn't have enough to do. Could we add something to the plate? I'm not hearing that. So people are already busy. And to acknowledge that busyness, I think is one of the really important things. So in addition to the busyness, and we know we all have to do it, right? That's why they call it work and they pay us to show up. But if we can carve out just a little piece of their high stakes game that connects to the strategy, that's what makes it high stakes. It's not that it's, external world peace. It's that it makes a difference inside the organization. That's what it takes for somebody to be high stakes. So I think as we have seen over the years, the organizations who take the time to connect their front line to the purpose of the organization acknowledging that they've got this frenetic bunch of activity that they have to maintain. They've done a better job at weathering uncertainty because they've got a little bit of a North Star in the midst of all of that.
I was just thinking, I jotted something down as we were talking there, Scott, because I was kind of wondering if I'm listening to this right now and I say, okay, I'm going to create a high stakes winnable game. Do you find that most of those games are structured around something we've just never thought about before and never done? We've got to like really do some outside research and bring in some big mental power to figure out, or is it already something that we're kind of already doing? Like in Harry's case, those three things were probably things they're already doing. They just coupled it or partnered it differently. Am I seeing that? I mean, it's a little bit less fearful if you're like, create a high stakes game. And by the way, you're already doing this stuff.
Yeah, yes, you've got that spot on. And it's about 90% of the organizations I'm working with take something that was already on their plate and give it this intensive care. We call it, kind of the intensive care focus and make that a high stakes winnable game. So it isn't something you've never done before, but you can go farther if everybody aligns their energy and effort to a narrow target. I think that's one of the biggest things that we've learned is if you try to do that with 10 targets, in addition to holding down your day job, you got no chance. But if you're narrowly focused and you've got people making, contributions that are synergistic because they're aligned to an overarching strategic priority, then leaders find that the adoption isn't so alien. It's just like, oh, this is not a new something to do. It's not a what, but it's just a how. We're just going to collectively put a little bit of focused energy and attention on it.
Do you think there's a shift that happens or has to happen, perhaps going back to even the beginning of what we were just talking about? Because you said, like, if I focus on a few things, I probably can get them done, but more, not necessarily get them done. But at the same time, I feel like I got to keep doing more stuff to get the engine to go the direction I want it to go, or move. There's again this counterintuitive piece where I keep wanting to pile more stuff on, even though it means that everybody's shoulders are breaking. But I need to keep piling stuff on. And I hear you saying, no. You're going the wrong way.
Yeah, you got it. Trying to do 10 new things where you run that doesn't work. Leaders, it's a challenge to narrow the focus because you're not hedging your bet by going down 10 different, maybe this will work, maybe this will work, maybe this will work. We're going to put our chips down. So the process to select that needs to be very intentional. And, I work with leadership teams all over the world, and most are surprised that we have a conversation about the highest level goal, and it takes 2 days. We're going to talk about one thing, and it takes 2 days to sort through all of the spaghetti on the wall possibilities to get the one thing that really will move the organization forward while maintaining all of that busyness. So you're going to do the intensive care, but you're only going to do intensive care on a very narrow target.
Well, you mentioned Harry. Have you had anybody where you're talking to them leader wise, and it's like they like that spaghetti on the wall? They like putting all those chips on the casino table, hoping something spins. And
oh yeah,
right.
they're gonna bet on black and red, the evens, the odds, and the greens. They're just gonna spread the chips everywhere. I would say that's a tendency, and it's a tendency either in new or less successful leaders. When you run across leaders who are particularly effective, one of the things I've seen is they are really good at this for their own little circle of influence, but they have a hard time scaling it. So that's the challenge. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, yeah, I understand that, but you understanding it and then getting the rest of the organization to line up behind it is two very different things.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was just thinking as you were talking about like that, like say like a first level leader. I was a team member, individual contributor, doing a great job of doing the tasks that are assigned to me. And someday somebody comes along, they tap me on the shoulder and they say, "Hey, Patrick, you're doing such a great job. We're going to make you a leader of team." And we always talk about that challenge of going from individual contributor to leader, formal leader, and how that's hard. It's a hard transition to make. But I hear you saying it's like, yeah, but there's other transitions you make across the course of your career when you go up to leaders of leaders or ultimately leaders of organizations where maybe there's some transitional things that are a little bit difficult to make. Like, how do I get everybody engaged?
Yeah, it's a series of different skill sets as you move up. The difference is most people who are good at a thing struggle letting go of that. There was an article a while back Harvard Business did on leaders and the fact that they spend a significant amount of their time working one or two levels below their job title. And we do that for a couple of pretty understandable reasons, right? One, we were pretty good at it. Two, I wasn't sure what to do at this strategic level, so I'm just going to drop down and get that done. And that does two things that are kind of counterproductive. One, you disempower the people, so they end up contributing less. And two, you don't have time on the strategic things that you need to be doing. So that's one of the first inflection points, is the ability to truly empower somebody. We see leaders struggle with that. Because, some people read a book and they think empowering is abandoning. Well, I told them they could do whatever they wanted to do, and that's empowerment. Well, it isn't. And it says, I told them clearly what to do, so they were empowered. Well, no, that's micromanagement. Like, so there's two different elements that I think are really important. If you consider the freedom of abandonment and the support of the micromanagement piece, you actually get a good recipe for empowerment. And I think for leaders, learning how to empower an individual is the first step, and then empower a team, and then empower leaders, and then the rest of the organization. So that's one of the skill sets that you have to learn as you move up the ladder.
Well, one more challenge I want to ask you about. We could go on for a long time, I know. And folks, Scott's dynamite. He just knows this stuff so well. Help us think through, if I'm a leader sitting at that executive table and I'm trying to help narrow the organization's focus, possibly in the back of my mind, not that I'm not trying to be a great team player up here, but possibly at the back of my mind, I'm also thinking we're going through uncertain times. I need to protect my budget and my people. And that could be that's a tension that I have to navigate, right? Between what's best for the organization and what's best for my team. And how have you seen people kind of work their way through that? Because ultimately that's like very real.
It's incredibly real. And I think right now we're feeling another round of it. Every so often there's a moment in our history where it shows up. And I think there's one thing that I've seen that really stands out to me. And that's the difference to play to win versus playing not to lose. Sometimes when things get a little bit tough, people, pull back and they start playing defense, playing not to lose. And sometimes if that's the spot you're in and you're having to retract, please don't take that as a universal indictment. But if there's an option to where you can find something that you can play to win, boy, when times are tough, that's when market shares change. If you've got somebody that can actually play to win. And I think that's true inside of organizations as well. I worked with an organization many years ago, and I had a leader. He had made it to his president of a brand you would all know. And he had gotten there by being kind of a gruff, a little acerbic. There's a whole bunch of words I was thinking of. None are probably appropriate for a reply chat. But he was that guy, but he was very successful. And he approached me as his coach and said, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And I said, "Sure. I think we can give it a try. Let's see what you got." Well, we've been working together for a while. He actually got moved to another organization at a higher level role. He was now vice chairman of a very large organization. And I was in his office waiting to meet with him, and his assistant, who was with him in the prior organization. I knew her very well also. Super talented, sharp individual, great contributor. She came over to him with some news that wasn't hers, but she was passing over, and he was really agitated, kind of blew up at her and said, "Da, da, 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 da," all of the sorts of things that you would imagine him saying. And I didn't react much then, but I walked into his office after that all settled down, and his name was Ken. I said, "Ken, how important is information to you?" He's like, "Oh, in this chair, if I don't have good information in a timely manner, I'm doomed." I said, "You just cut your information in half, right?" He's like, "What do you mean?" I go, "I know you know her, and she knows you. She didn't take anything you said personally, and I don't think that makes it okay, but I think she knows. But everyone in that blast radius, I called it, the blast radius of you blowing up, they are not going to give you information until it's so safe to hand you that it's virtually worthless, that you can't act upon it." And it took him a while, but he took that to heart. So I think, in those moments, you've got to be very intentional about, how you bring people in and that you don't shoot yourself in the foot. Because, as a leader at any level, information is one of the things that you must have, and you must have a clear, and effective path.
That's so true. I've had those situations, right, where how I deliver the message, how they receive it, oftentimes will curtail my willingness to deliver that message. You look at a colleague, go, you go in there next time and tell them X, Y, and Z. So as we wrap up, Scott, we talked a little bit about like doing the groundwork before you even get into situations, and obviously if you're in the midst of it, here's some things to stop and do right now, things ways to act differently. And we talked about everything from communication to winning to really putting a stake in the ground. But the other side of the coin sometimes could be, okay, so if I do all this, I survived the situation, whatever it might be, or my team survives this. What actually do we get on the back end for like working our way through some tough times, delivering some results that really matter? Like what's the impact on our culture or on our ability to tackle bigger things in the future, or just our own morale or just our fulfillment in life? I mean, give us the kind of the hope side of the equation about here's the value in the long run.
Yeah, I love our problem with this because we always ask leaders after we've done all of the work you just described, we've gone through the hard time, we've gone through the launch, we've had success, and we say, we'd love to talk to you about your results. They want to talk about their culture. Because when you give people an opportunity, busy people, the opportunity to make a contribution that matters, that high stakes winnable game or progress and purpose, however you want to frame that up, people's engagement goes up. You actually accomplish more, engagement goes up. Working with, and it was in the book, so I can talk about it. So Alex Azar was the president of Eli Lilly when we were working together. And we asked him, so tell me about your perception of this whole thing and the results. And he took probably 5 minutes of talking about the culture before he said, oh, and by the way, the results were the best they've been in our organization's history. So I think that our culture is you'll have people who feel empowered because they'll truly be empowered. You can't empower somebody, without a system. And if it's arbitrary or inconsistent, you really damage it. So real empowerment takes consistency in support, consistency in freedom. So those two things I think are kind of the governing around that. Game, it becomes contagious. One of my favorite stories we get to talk about is the Opryland Hotel. And we love talking about hotels because I can give examples about all kinds of organizations, any industry in the world. And I'll ask an audience, I said, how many of you have worked in aerospace? Not many hands. How many have worked in biotech? How many of you stayed at a hotel? Every hand goes up. So we use hotels a lot. And Opryland is one of my favorite examples because they had 75 frontline teams who were going through kind of challenging times. They needed to move their metric. And of those 75 teams, every single one hit their individual target while running their busy day jobs. And they exceeded our wildest expectation. Like they blew their number by, it was like a 50% improvement. And I was thinking a 10% improvement would be more than noteworthy. And at the end of the day, they made that much progress. So I think the hope is this: empowered, engaged people do better contributions to your strategy, and they have more fulfillment at work, and they have less turnover, more job satisfaction as they go through. So for me, when you pay the price to be clear, connect people's work to that clear, intent and strategy, and give them something where they can win that matters to that strategy, they can endure some of that whirlwind. And as a matter of fact, it cools the whirlwind a little bit because they create some economies of when they work on focus with other team members as well. So to me, that's the good news. There's results and engagement. When we can increase those two things at the same time, it's a pretty good bet.
Scott, I think you just for me at least, you gave a lot of hope, right? A lot of hope about, hey, there's a formula you can follow here that allows you to not only just act differently in the midst of uncertainty, but to emerge differently. And I appreciate you taking some time to chat with us today. I hope the listeners, I know they found a lot of value in the conversation. So Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Great to see you again, Patrick.
Great seeing you. Well, again, Scott, thanks for the conversation. It was incredibly enlightening and helpful, and I truly appreciate you sharing this with us today. I know the listeners will benefit from it as well. And thank you to everybody listening. If you're interested in more about how to navigate disruption, perhaps you want to schedule my keynote, Disrupt Everything, based on my groundbreaking research at Vanderbilt University and the book by the same name, which I co-authored with James Patterson. Yep, that James Patterson, the world's best-selling author. Together, we help individuals, teams, and organizations not just survive, but really profit from disruption. For more details, check out the show notes for the link, and be sure to check out Scott Thele. Go find him online, partner with him. You will not wish you hadn't. Trust me. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, for this episode of Leading Through Uncertainty. My name's Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.